So already started the meeting. Okay. So we need to hit start meeting to let people in. Okay. Hi, Senka. Hi, Malahay. How are you?
I've put the start meeting on, and so it's recording.
Ooh, okay. So it looks like I need to allow mics for Malahay and Senka to say something. Okay.
Oh,
I just
Yeah,
pressed
I'm
something
okay now.
called, hello everyone, sorry. I just pressed something that it says, allow people to unmute themselves.
okay.
It seems that before that you must, but yeah, should
right.
work now.
Okay. So is my mic working now?
We don't want everybody to be able to unmute themselves if there's 50 people in here.
So do you prefer to keep the unmute themselves untick? Okay.
Until the end, and then we can put them on there. Oh, I've lost my presentation now.
Eunjae, can you check if you can from your end unmute Senka and Malahay? Because when I untick that, everyone has the microphone disabled.
It's already disabled.
Yeah, because I just no, you should have it next
Maria,
to
I can unmute it. If I click on the little 3 buttons next to Senka's name with more options, it says allow mic.
Yeah,
and so I could do that individually. I'd much rather do that than have everybody being able to have a chat.
Yes.
No problem. It's up to you now. I will be in the background.
Oh, hang on. What am I doing?
How come?
I'm just a bit worried, Maria, that we have so few people in here and we had about 37 replies. I just hope they're not waiting somewhere different. I don't know where that would be. Maria, do we have to do anything with the trust list that comes on?
Sorry, I didn't hear the what
it's just I've got Diane, you're showing as an untrusted organisation.
No, it's
just kind of funny.
Probably she's signing in from an external.
Yeah, that's okay. At least you're in here and you can hear, and I can disable your microphone if you actually want to talk. So I just wanted to check that that was okay. Jennifer Alford, I see you in here. I will unmute you.
Thank you, Loraine.
I'll hand over to you because we're a minute from the beginning. So
yes, sure. Thanks, Loraine and Eunjae, and thank you everyone for coming today. Hello. I can't see everyone on the screen in terms of who's here, but welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Jen Alford. I'm Deputy Head of School Research and Deputy Director of Griffith Institute for Educational Research. And we're very proud of the work that Loraine and her team have done on this project. So it gives me great pleasure this afternoon to welcome you all and open this session. Stephen Hodge, the Director of GIER, he couldn't be here today, so I'm standing in for him. So without further ado, I would like to say, let's go, Loraine. Can't wait to hear about shifting landscapes, shifting identities, shifting conceptions of teaching around the turn to teaching employment-based pathway. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I'll just mute you there if that's okay, just in case your dog comes in or something. Good afternoon, everybody. And Jen, thanks for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. Before we get started with our presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're meeting here today, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also note that the research that the data that was collected for this project happened on multiple country around Queensland, the state of Queensland. So thanks for being here, and without further ado, we will get started. It takes a long time for the slide to tap, so I will tap it and take 3 breaths and see what happens before it goes. So a really quick overview of this afternoon's presentation, where we'll just give you a little bit of background, talk about the design and the analysis, and spend a lot of our time on the findings and some of the more practical implications and resources for schools. But before I do get started, I would like to acknowledge the support and thank GIER for the support in getting this afternoon organised. Thanks, Maria. And also acknowledge that some of the participants are with us this afternoon, Malahai and Senka from QUT here, and Eunjae has been a fantastic supporter in the project the whole way through. And I'm sliding down the list and I don't see Sunshine Coast. Oh, Renee is with us as well, and University of Southern Cross, I just can't see there at the moment, or Southern Cross University. So that was the team that we had, which I will get onto in a moment. So for those, we have a few people who've replied from interstate. I'll just give you a quick rundown on the Turn to Teaching program. It's an employment-based pathway with a $20,000 scholarship incentive for the first year of a Masters of Teaching program, and other incentives in the second year, including a 50% students balancing a 50% study load and a 50% in-school internship for their teaching load, which is about 25 hours in schools per fortnight. They are supernumerary on staff. They receive a full-time salary. They have certain conditions around which responsibilities they're not to take on, such as playground duty, class cover or bus duty. They show their competence through the gradual release model. Until then, they're fully supervised by a supervising teacher. They also have an assigned mentor in schools. They're very ably supported by the Turn to Teaching team and by the liaisons allocated by the university. So the difference, or the real gem of the Turn to Teaching as opposed to a general permission to teach, is that they have employer and university provided wraparound support at all levels. And I'm not saying PTTs don't do that, but it's a very intentional and well-designed process that has a lot of funding attached to it as well. So in our research project, we look at the data from the pilot cohort, cohort 1 and cohort 2. And you can see in red the universities that had those cohorts at that, you can see the universities that had the cohorts or hosted the cohorts at that particular time. And the typing in red are the universities associated with this project. So as I press the button, I'm going to click on my aircon. Sorry, it's clicked off. I'm dying. And of course, before we started this research, we undertook a systematic literature review. This is a conceptual framework developed from that review, which informed the design of our program. Now, the gap that we found in this, through this literature review, is lots of research coming out of the States, coming out of the UK, increasing amount coming out of Australia. But most of that research had a very strong focus on the students' experience in employment-based pathways. And so from that gap, we identified that some voices were missing. And so that then shaped the design of the project that I will go ahead and explain a little bit later on. But it also helped us think about some of the terminology that we would use in our research question as well, and how we would how we would go about collecting the data as well. So we're using the term employment-based pathways, even though we're specifically looking at the Turn to Teaching program, the affordances and constraints of the Turn to Teaching program. We're using the word employment-based pathways because it is one of many employment-based pathways that are around. And the systematic literature review looked at the range of employment-based pathways, and a limitation of that review was English-speaking papers only considered. So perhaps there are what we're doing in another language, but in the English-speaking papers that were available, we did not find anything that looked simultaneously at the impact or perceptions of the interns, their supervising teachers, their mentor teachers, or anything to do with linking to the university as well, the liaisons and the organisers or the people in charge of rolling out that program. So that hence formed the basis of our 18-month research. So I mentioned before about the terminology. One of the things that I found really interesting in this is we talked about the word preparedness. And as a group, when we were tossing around how to come up with this project, we intentionally put the word preparedness in the grant application to the Department of Education, which I should say this is a funded grant from the Horizon grant process. Preparedness was a term that was being used a lot in lots of documents, lots of reporting, lots of reviews, and we intentionally picked that word preparedness. And what became quite obvious when we were speaking to our participants in the research was the fact that people had very different ideas about what preparedness looked like. And that became quite an interesting point of discussion for us. When I say people, I'm talking about the students, I'm talking of the interns, talking about the mentor teachers, talking about what the liaison expects, and also in the literature. So it was just a really interesting point. And we have done another presentation on that at AARE and about what people were talking about around that area. Of course, we're looking particularly at teacher professional identity, and we called it that to be very intentional, that these master's students are coming into the Turn to Teaching program. Many of them have a professional identity from the career that they're changing from. And so we intentionally chose teacher professional identity as the term that we were using. And we were looking specifically at their agency, their self-efficacy, self-care, and resilience, and how that wrapped around and became part of their identity. And throughout our literature review and also expanded from our data, we looked at the complexities of teaching and what that looked like, but we also looked at some of the key factors that wrapped around teacher identity. So what were these influences that are wrapping around teacher identity. And there's a fair bit of information in the literature about that in general for teacher professional identity. One of the things that was really significant was about the discourses of education, particularly because it's quite negative at the moment in social media platforms, in schools, but also because these people were in schools for a year on an internship, and so they were exposed to a lot of discourse around that area. It was something that came up quite a bit. So that was our notion of professional identity. And we also, in our question, looked at the complexities of teaching, because we're looking at the emotionality of teaching, the context, the student cohorts that you're working with, some of the bureaucracy that you deal with, workload, and the relationships. All of those things make teaching a very complex endeavour, and more complex than ever before, I think. I'm scared to press up. There it goes. Okay, so I talked about the systematic literature review informing our project design. And as I mentioned, this was a study funded by the Department of Education in Queensland through the Horizon grant offering. And we designed a cross-institutional multi-case study that aimed to shed some light on the affordances and constraints of the Turn to Teaching program, and also to consider what are these implications for ITE providers, for employers, and for employment-based pathways into teaching, knowing that that's particularly an important area. And you can see by the research question there how we specifically highlighted the focused and intentionally placed the words preparedness, complexities of teaching, and professional identity. So we had, we were quite definite in the types of things that we were looking for. Eunjae, would you like to talk about the data collection and then move on to the rest of our project design?
Okay, so can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So this study employed a qualitative dominant mixed method design over an 18-month period, drawing on 2 distinct participant groups. So set 1 focused on students in the program. We collected data from them at 3 different points through interviews to understand how their experiences evolved over time and to build a broader picture of the overall student intern experience. The survey on student self-efficacy and attitude towards diversity provided a numerical snapshot of their progress. It was administered online before the 1st and 3rd interviews, and results helped to refine and adjust the interview questions. Set 2 included other stakeholders involved in the Turn to Teaching program, such as the TTT project team, university liaisons, and school staff, such as supervising teachers, mentor teachers, and school leaders. These participants were interviewed at 3 points, and most took part twice. This allowed the participants pool to respond to changes in the program resulting from new intakes of TTT interns and the range of schools included with each cohort. The survey provided quantitative data through close-ended questions to help inform the subsequent semi-structured interviews, and accordingly, we used the 2 analytical approaches, descriptive statistics for the survey and thematic analysis for the interviews. Because the survey's main purpose was to guide the qualitative phase, its analytical procedures and results are not discussed in this presentation. So the figure here basically shows you how we progressed with the interview data analysis. Auto-generated Microsoft Teams transcript were reviewed before analysis, and a hybrid thematic analysis approach was used, combining inductive insight from participants' experiences with deductive theory-informed coding. And this integration allowed both established frameworks and emerging ideas to shape the themes, supporting a balanced interpretation of the data. The analysis followed Braun and Clark's thematic analysis using both theory-driven and data-driven codes to develop the final themes. In the first step, the data were read and reread to build a strong understanding of each participant's story and the overall data set. Some transcripts were shared across the research team, and a debriefing meeting was held to develop a preliminary code book. Initial codes were then refined and developed based on key features such as recurring words, phrases, and patterns. The deductive phase involved reviewing and comparing codes across the dataset to form broader themes and sub-themes, merging overlapping codes and removing those that were not relevant. So drawing on TTT program resources alongside the inductively refined codes, 6 core dimensions of the TTT program model were identified: systemic, operational, social, emotional, cultural, and pedagogical. Guided by these dimensions, the essential meanings were guided by these dimensions, the data set were reread to ensure they capture the essential meanings while allowing new dimensions to emerge where needed. So in our original report, the findings are organized around 6 dimensions that represent key elements of the Turn to Teaching program. Just to briefly introduce what they are, the operational dimension covers the working and learning conditions of interns, including workload structures, school arrangement, and financial support designed to reduce barriers and enhance retention. The social dimension focuses on the relational and collaborative structures surrounding interns. Stakeholder interviews highlight strong support for identity formation, but also inconsistencies in the quality and reliability of social support across the schools. The emotional dimensions captures interns' well-being, motivation, confidence and resilience as they navigate classroom pressures, emotional labor, managing behavior, trauma and workload create both stress and opportunities for growth when adequate support is available. The cultural dimension highlights how career changes, diverse experiences, professional skills and backgrounds enrich school communities and shape identity development as they transition into teaching. And finally, the pedagogical dimension encompasses the practical teaching skills and decision-making processes interns develop, including lesson planning, classroom management, differentiation, inclusion, and reflective practice. So these 6 interrelated dimensions collectively shape interns' experiences within the Turn to Teaching program. And this leads us to ask what conditions need to be in place for TTT interns to thrive, and what happens when those conditions are missing or limited. So I'll now hand over to Loraine to continue.
Thanks, Eunjae. I'll just pick up that the systemic framework was about the governance and institutional coordination and the alignment with workforce planning, so where students were placed and things like that. So you can see this is kind of orderly and it's got a fashion and it's been broken down, and that's how we reported an easy read report, which is available, and I will share that afterwards. However, we all know, if you are involved in teacher education or teaching, that learning to be a teacher does not happen in such an orderly manner. It doesn't happen in a straight line, and it doesn't always happen smoothly. Hence the branding around the slides that are there. I'm not sure whether you saw the first slide, and I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that we're using Deleuze and Guattari's rhizome here. However, I did use that in my thesis, and I often think about that messiness of learning to be a teacher like a rhizome in the garden. So it's underground, it's spreading out in different ways. Sometimes it's dormant and there's no other growth. And then other times the rain comes down, the conditions are perfect, And when you think you've gotten rid of the nutgrass, it just pops up all over your garden and becomes a pesty weed that it is. And that's my automatic thinking around becoming a teacher. So sometimes you can see students coasting along. Sometimes the conditions are not right. They're under pressure. They might shrivel a little bit. They might come forward. The conditions are right, they flourish. And Deleuze and Guattari would call that the asignifying rupture. But we're just talking about it being messiness and the conditions being right, that we could talk about helping the students to thrive, or what is it in the TTT program that might be missing that could be added. And of course, with that messiness of becoming a teacher also comes that individual journey, that not everybody goes on the same journey. And for something that's been very helpful for one person, or a relationship or an interaction with one person, might not be something that is helpful in another. So conditions can be dependent on the individual or the individuals that are making up the context. And we're trying, rather than giving you a dichotomy of affordances, constraints, we're going to attempt this afternoon to give you a more ecological model of our findings, so that we can then drill down and find out, okay, so what was working for some people, what wasn't working for others. And before I go on, as Eunjae was talking, I had time to have a look at the participant list, and I would just like to acknowledge the Turn to Teaching team members who are here, but also the participants. Some of our students are here, and some of our mentor teachers and supervisors. So welcome and thank you for giving even more of your time to our project. So let's get on to this messy journey that that helped get through this complexity. Now, don't worry about the little writing in the hexagons there, because it's on the side, left-hand side. What I was really trying to illustrate here was the connectedness and the messiness that is the journey of the conditions and the capacities of people that can link together to help a student flourish or flounder. So we think about it, we've pulled out and thought about it in terms of individual resources, the relational supports and the structural conditions. And that's been massaged together to bring a picture of this messiness that we're going to unpack this afternoon. So when we talk about individual resources, of course, it's not just the individual resources of the intern that's coming in. It can be the resource of the mentor teacher or the supervising teacher. It could be the prior experiences of the intern or the supervisors or mentors. It can be the prior experience and individual resources that the liaison brings to the party as well. There are so many people involved in this process that each person brings their own prior experience and knowledge, their own set of individual resources that sometimes start from a place of great self-efficacy. Sometimes it might be, their efficacy is lowered in those conditions, particularly those that may have come from the students coming from, interns coming from a different profession and into this one. So efficacy could be quite fluid. People come with different resilience strategies. They have different ways of accessing supports for resilience. And all of this comes back to the individual resources and capacities of the student, of the people involved. And part of that is their character trait of perhaps being adaptable and being able to be flexible in new conditions that they find themselves in. And for many people, the interns, the staff, the HEIs, the school staff, the liaisons, this was a new condition. This was a new project right at the beginning, and it did have people who were adaptable were able to move with the flow, a little bit like a bit of seaweed. So this is the complex nature of everybody who's in this process. The relational supports. Now, I'm sure you agree, I hope you agree with me, that good teaching is based on quality relationships, and people who are comfortable in teaching, schools that are flourishing have strong relational supports and strong relational pedagogies happening in their school. And it's no different here for our students. And some of those relational supports obviously came from the mentor teacher and the supervisors and the liaisons. They were pivotal relational supports to the interns, but so was the relationship they had with the Turn to Teaching team and the relationship that we all had with each other. So building our relationships with the Department of Education. And I think this project has been really good in bringing HEIs together as well, because we were able to talk about things from different institutional perspectives, lenses, try different ideas. It brought us together with open sharing, which also helped us working with the Turn to Teaching team. And that allowed us to have some very timely first aid if it was needed, and also to be able to report and share the positive stories that were there as well. And I really want to highlight the role of the liaisons here, that the liaison played such a pivotal role in that relationship connection. They were working with interns, they were working with the school-based staff, they were reporting back to the HEIs, they were reporting back to the Turn to Teaching. They were the ones that were keeping the communication going. And as you'll see a little bit later on, sometimes that was a really difficult job for them. So that was that part of the relational support, but also staff room culture plays a huge part in how anybody can flourish in their workplace. And when the staff room culture is not one that you feel safe in, obviously the conditions aren't right, you don't flourish. You're not a rhizome popping out everywhere, and it becomes an important part of your identity development in that place as well, and our data showed that. I think a really important part through those strong relationships was the recognition about what, the value of a teacher and the recognition of becoming a teacher. That was a really important product of those relational supports that played a huge role in feeding into the professional identity and sense of efficacy that our students, our interns, were developing. Of course, structural conditions would be lovely to have a magic wand and make everything work well, but schools themselves are complex places and timetables can be difficult, but you add on to that the timetables of one HEI and their schedule for semesters or trimesters, and then added on to a second one because sometimes there were two of them in a school, and you can see that sometimes the structural conditions could be quite challenging, but never to be a barrier that couldn't be worked around, I guess. It became a point where people could think differently. Were you able to adapt? How can we do this and move forward? And sometimes the conditions were right and it could happen. So a really important part that comes through was about role clarity and the quality of communication. And that's something that had, if it wasn't strong, it had quite a strong negative impact on the development of our teachers' preparedness. And of course, when it was strong, then there was a flourish. And the university school alignment and how we could work to support the pre-service, the interns, the pre-service teachers turning into interns for that internship year, and what that transition would look like. So that's the three sort of areas that I'm going to focus on for the next part. And the diagram on the side is just to sort of indicate some of the complexities that we have talked about in various areas of the data coming through. It's really good that this makes me take a breath. This takes a long time. It actually makes me take a breath in my talking. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an example through the data of those things I was pointing out to you before. So in this example one, we had examples where there was high personal capacity, or there was a perception on the person that they had a high personal capacity. Sometimes it might have been mixed with ineffective communication, and that led to the risk of emotional exhaustion. So in the data, for example, we've got one beginning teacher who's saying one of the main things that prepared me was dealing with tough situations in my previous career, understanding how to manage that situation. And you could see that here's an example of how that past experiences or those past personal resources that the interns were bringing in could be, in this case, was a very, very positive outcome. But some people hadn't had that experience. And so dealing with tough decision-making, tough behaviours, tough conversations with parents wasn't quite as easy for some as others, or quite as manageable. I'm not sure it's ever easy. So another beginning teacher who talked about the knowledge that they had for their subject area and the passion really helped them to be engaged and reflective. And it helped the students that they were teaching to be more engaged, and it reflected well in their grades. So they could see that their passion and their prior knowledge and that knowledge being, I guess, massaged into their pedagogical approaches was allowing them to flourish, and they could see the impact of the student, the feedback from the students that they were getting was feeding into their self-efficacy and hence their professional teacher identity. However, sometimes when there was ineffective communication, there was a lot of frustration that happened. So sometimes the staff changed over quite rapidly in schools. They are not places where staff is always static. And so some people who might have had a role in the TTT program had been promoted or transferred or for whatever, got sick. And perhaps there was a breakdown in communication about what the TTT program looked like or how it was being managed in that school. And that was a place where the liaison was essential in identifying those gaps and helping to bridge that communication. But of course, nothing's ever perfect. And so there were times where one pre-service teacher was rather frustrated that he had to keep explaining to the heads of the department about the program. They had to explain everything because no one seemed to know about it. It was constant. And if you are constantly having to explain something, it can be frustrating. You start to question whether you're actually on the right page with those things. And then there were other barriers for people who had a role in scheduling timetables or scheduling time off for consultation, and that person didn't actually know what was required. So sometimes that first term, particularly in the early years where it was such a new program, there were a lot of teething problems that could lead to the emotional exhaustion felt by not just the interns, but everybody who was working in that program, including the staff in schools. Some of the other breakdown in communication might have been that in some instances, some schools had very high expectations of these interns because they were master's students perhaps, they were older, they had more experience and life experiences to draw from. But these people were perhaps 1 year into university with maybe 25 days practical experience before they go in the internship. And so the expectations might not have been aligned. And so that required some additional communication. And I'm not saying it's always negative communication. I'm just saying it's times where it was noted that some triage had to be applied in those areas. And so when things were going well, and this is a beginning teacher who had been in cohort 1, pilot cohort, and then come through into the second year of his beginning teacher. came to realise that that life experience, just being that little bit older, was something that they could draw on. It made them more grounded because they realised that the sun was still going to come up tomorrow when something didn't go right. And so they were able to be probably a little bit more flexible with a little bit more adaptability that we need to see in beginning teachers, because nothing's ever going to be perfect or run smoothly on every day. So that's just the first example, and it had kind of a less positive outcome. So the second example she says clicking twice, is when there was strong mentorship. Sometimes that may have been occurring in operational barriers, and there may have been frustration, but there's also noticing the growth that could happen in these areas. So, for example, strong mentoring, we've got these supervisors who are very clear on how they're giving their feedback. They know that they're working towards the gradual release indicators or the professional experience standards, depending on which phase they were working in. And they, if they see that they have to manage something around, say, student safety, then they make sure that's something that they model and work on. So they, in this case, this supervisor too, had some really clear goals attached with the feedback and the mentoring. So quite a strong example of some mentoring conversation there. But sometimes, despite the best interests, there might be timetabling or operational barriers, so that the intern perhaps didn't get as much chance to observe quality teaching that they needed to be able to see, because they were timetabled onto their own class at that time. So sometimes some additional tweaks were required, and examples of where things weren't always perfectly aligned. And for some schools, they just didn't have the staff. This program is actually designed for hard to staff schools, by location, hard to staff schools, hard to staff teaching areas perhaps. And so in some schools, one mentor said that, you know, they really didn't have time to take on a TTT. Perhaps the long haul would have been okay, but there was a lot of time taken up, and not everybody's journey ended in success. So there were challenges that were faced. And then I was mentioning before about that changes in employment and who's at the school. And so sometimes the schools agreed to have them, and the principals moved on by the next year. And so they were chopping and changing, and it was quite difficult and frustrating for the liaison. But when there's something, another frustration that happened in a particular school was when they, the needs or their interpretation was that the needs or the ruling or where the intern would end up changed, and they lost their intern. They had benefited a lot from having that person in the school, but they'd also invested a lot. And so there was a little bit of frustration that they didn't earmark themselves as a school in need, perhaps, so they could keep that staff member. But when we saw layers of support that were well aligned, we could see supports that were provided that started right back where the, you know, thinking about the theory that they're learning and actually seeing and hearing and using it in a practical sense in their internship. That was a really good foundation. And this beginning teacher in their second year, they actually could see that. And what we actually picked up, if you're looking at the cohorts, it was the beginning teachers were actually starting to reflect on and understand some of the positives that they probably hadn't noticed when they were living the experience. So the data here, we've got one that comes from referring to the role of the liaison. We've got some information talking about the mentor teacher and the supervising teacher. And then we're talking about that support and that helpfulness coming, and those positive relationships coming at a faculty or a staff room level. And then we've got the impact of feeling comfortable, feeling like you're contributing to the broader school community and the profession. So here are all these layers of support that are provided for our interns, and they are feeling really comfortable in the end game with their profession and the broader community. And one example of something that was really significant, we had a teacher who was on the internship and was in the hospitality area. Could be wrong, but I think that's what it was. Anyway, part of what she brought to the school was the capacity to run a morning tea session, run the kitchen, do all of those things, and have the parents come in to the cafe. And it was a hugely successful event. It brought the community from a country area into the school. And a comment was made that this was an early career teacher, and parents were going, "Oh, I can't believe you're just starting out. You're doing such a great job." And so she was getting lots of feedback, boosting her sense of efficacy, her professional identity, from not just her immediate peers, not just her supervising teacher, but from that community as well. So there's some examples of to illustrate the complexity that we were talking about and about what that looks like. Are there any questions so far? I think you can probably raise your hand. Eunjae will sing out if there is a question. No? Okay. So what? Like, we've done this project. There's a lot of stuff that's already known. There's a lot of stuff that is generalised from the pre-service teacher transitioning into the teaching area. What's different and what are we contributing here? And one of the things that we have pulled out to share to underpin our practical resources for schools are 8 principles and practices for supporting employment-based pathways into teaching. Now, yes, they're specific to our experiences and our data from the Turn to Teaching team, but we've also been our Turn to Teaching process, but we've been thinking about it in terms of the literature we've been reading as well, and come up with these 8 principles and practices that will allow a community, members of the profession and the wider community to support these people coming into teaching, because the needs of these employment-based pathway interns have similarities, but have their own set of challenges or specific needs compared to someone who's just finished uni, come into school, and then 4 years later is teaching. Some of these people are in mid-career changes. There's a financial cost to doing the change. There's a huge impact on their sense of self and their identity. So what is it that we can do? What have we learned from this project that can support mid-career changes come into teaching through employment-based pathways? Well, we have these 8 principles that are aligned with some practices, and I'll just give you a minute to read what they are. And in the next part of the presentation, we actually want to introduce you to the practical resources through these and explain what these 8 principles and practices are. So number 1, obviously, we've talked about that shared understanding of the roles and responsibilities. Number 2 was effective communication. The third one is about maintaining that support coming in, through and beyond the internship. So when you're coming in through that transition from being at uni pre-service teacher to an intern, throughout that year and then beyond into your internship, the support doesn't finish at the end of the internship. They're still transitioning into that beginning teacher role. And I think that's really important. And part of our report, before we talk about the principles and practices, we talk about these 3 phases of being a beginning teacher. Now, some literature will take you up to 5 years. Some will call beginning teacher the first 2 years. We've just talked about these 3 phases of what it looks like. So you're a pre-service teacher, and then you're an intern, and then you're transitioning into a teacher. I'll just jump into one of the limitations that we've identified here is that we don't have longitudinal data to say how impactful this is going to be. And that will be an excellent project in 3 or 5 years to see where our turn to teaching people are at that point in time. So it'll be interesting to see where did the support continue beyond the internship. And that was really important in a school where an intern was really well supported in his internship year. Great supervisor, great mentor, great leadership, great staff, another intern at the school. So, you know, lots of people to bounce ideas off. And in his first year as a beginning teacher had been transferred to a different school where there was no one else in his teaching area. And so he relied on that earlier support that he had, his connection with that other school. His needs actually increased as he became a beginning teacher. So that beyond the internship time is really, really important. Also, understanding that there is a lot of reciprocal learning can happen through the turn to teaching or employment-based pathways. So those who were mentoring and supervising often found that they were themselves improving their own pedagogies. There were benefits for the community as well, which I explained before. Individualised personal learning, because it is people come with such diverse backgrounds. Of course, there's a lot of differences in what professional learning they needed at a particular point in time. And that wasn't just the important role of the mentor and the supervisor, that was also an important role of the intern to be reflective, to understand where their needs were and how they were going to have them met. I mentioned before that there were about how the staff, how the interns were employed or where they were employed, often in small schools or hard to staff schools, short staff schools where they were really, really busy. There were 2 types of external, besides the external support of the turn to teaching team and the university. The liaison in particular as a standalone external support was amazing. And some other schools employed a business that's job was to come in and support their early career staff, and so the turn to teaching people could get onto that when they were beginning teachers. So different sorts of external support. Because they are coming in at a more mature stage of their life, some were really after leadership opportunities, but others absolutely didn't want them. So again, very different. It's not like we must have leadership opportunities. Know your staff and who was looking for that, but definitely think about how that's going to keep that person in the profession. And as we saw about all the layers aligning together, that collective approach, you know, it takes a village to raise a teacher. Yes, it does. And so it was that collective approach that made a big difference. So what have we got on offer for schools to perhaps benefit from what we're doing, or for those who've been through the program and are listening? What can you do differently? We have made a slide deck of, I think, 15 of these scenarios using the data, and there's the data over on the side there, just a snapshot of some data, to create different scenarios. So the context in here is an intern receives minimal support from the mentor, relying almost entirely on the supervising teacher. So those mentor and supervising teachers have different roles, which are explained in our handbook for this particular tool. And so this is a contextual example that we have extracted from the data. We've identified what a moral or ethical dilemma might be for your staff. because there's never ever just one right answer, is there? This is not got an easy solution. This is about having conversations and working through to see how it best fits in your staff. So we've suggested some discussion questions as well. How do you recognise when an intern is under-supported, and what actions are ethically required of mentors or supervisors when they notice that that's happening? So, you know, they're quite serious topics, and when we're looking at well-being, and we have had mentors who had a silent struggle, interns who've had a silent struggle. It might happen in a school where you're a professional experience coordinator or you're a deputy, then you've got some new staff. These can be adapted into multiple settings, but we put the data there just to show you that, you know, this is where we got some of those ideas from, and we've linked it to some APSTs that might just help if you're using it as a professional learning opportunity in your school. I'm just looking at the time. It's okay. I'll just move on to the next one. Another scenario would be about the pedagogical choices. Sometimes the intern comes in with their ideas that they want to try. Sometimes the school has their own ideas, and the supervising teacher can be under a lot of pressure for the accountability of their students' progress. And so it creates perhaps an area of tension. So how do you balance the consistency of the school and the classroom routine with supporting the autonomy that your students want to bring to the situation? So this is, I guess, this could be a softer way of opening up some conversations in schools, because these are quite hard conversations to have. Is this the one that's got the Padlet, Eunjae? No? No? Okay, that's fine. Okay, and the third one, the next one from the set, which is the third one here, is about the new graduate. So the new graduate feeling isolated, particularly compared to this is the one I was talking about before, when they've gone from previously a strong supervisory structure, and the mentor knows that the intern needs connection and is not sure how much emotional or pastoral support is appropriate to provide. So again, some ethical and moral dilemmas, I guess, things that schools need to talk out, what it is, what are the boundaries in their school, how are they going to work within those? And then some discussion questions that you could promote within your staff. And of course, it's about staying in your own lane. And I think this is a particularly important example in the year-long internship models, because when there is tension or challenge or extra pressure on staff, whether it's the intern or the supervising teacher or the mentor teacher, that actually can weigh down. It is quite challenging for teachers sometimes during say a 5 or 6 week block prac to be able to manage that emotional drain that can come with that. But when it's a year long, it is something that really needs to be monitored as well, not just for our intern, but also for the staff working there, because these staff are not paid to take an intern. They do get paid during the professional experience part, but the supervising teachers are doing it as a professional courtesy, I guess. And there probably are payoffs in other things they get to do, but that it's not a paid role that they are doing in there for almost a year. So that's the first set of resources. We were talking about, that's very much based on the founding on the data that we've had. And I think I said there was about 15 in those. We also have a set of scenarios that don't lend themselves so much to a slide. I picked the shortest ones I could, but the first three I just showed you were probably more targeted to mentor teachers and supervising teachers, and these are probably more directed towards a whole school. So when you're taking a person from an employment-based pathway, particularly the turn to teaching, there are certain requirements, there are certain restrictions around them. And for example, not doing playground duty or not being able to take a spare, that did cause some angst in staff rooms. And also it was confusing for a PTT versus a TTT, what they were and weren't allowed to do. So these scenarios, and there's probably 12 in these scenarios, I think, are there to open conversations within the whole school. So you're going to host a TTT or you're hosting a set of employment-based pathway staff. I was talking to a school this week that had 8 PTTs. So, you know, these are conversations about how we're managing the expectations of these employment-based pathways to the profession. So I'll give you a few minutes just to read this scenario on the screen. Something quite ironic, as I was working on this slide yesterday, the exact same conversation. I was talking to a student currently in the program, and it was the exact same conversation. And it was quite reassuring to be able to say to her, yep, a lot of people go through this, and this is how this person might have dealt with it. So it was reassuring that it was not a one-off, that this is there, which we never would have picked it for the data, but it's, you know, this is a group that's not even in our data set, and it was extremely relevant in that situation. So again, it's been designed to be helpful in schools, to support, to make transfer our learning into an actionable product, I guess. And we have some discussion prompts that are over on the right-hand side there, and linking it with those principles and practices so that we are connecting the dots from our data through to what it actually means in practice. We did have a Padlet set up in some of these, but I'm not sure. Is this one with the Padlet, Eunjae? I'm not, can we make it full screen? I wonder if anyone's game enough to perhaps type some of the questions there, like what skills would you focus on in the next lesson? What reflection routine helped out? I'm not sure whether it's even going to work, but it would be interesting if someone tried typing in it to see. It worked for us, but it might not work for you.
I'll just share the link in the chat,
okay.
but I'm not sure whether everyone has the chat, because some external people don't. Let me just try them. Yeah. Did you get it, Senka and Malahai? Yeah, good.
So even if you don't want to type into it, it's sort of in your staff area or in your groups there. You can see how there's very little planning needs to go, very little impost on the person who's doing this. Hopefully they find this helpful and timely. So if there's a particular time, is it, you know, which ones are better before the intern starts? What happens after? So we've got them for sort of the range of situations and and hopefully it allows people to choose them and find them to be helpful in their practice. So we might take it off, Eunjae, and I'll see if I can get rid of that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there's one there about, oh, sorry, I'll just go back to the one before it. There we go. So again, I was talking about the leadership. We had one student or two students who were right in their first year, really keen for a leadership opportunity. And then we had one person who was like, there is no way I ever want to get into leadership. I just want to stay in the classroom. I love it. I love what I'm doing. It's a lot. They found it less pressure than their previous job, but it was early days. It's different for everybody, but it also highlights the fact that leadership isn't about your name having deputy or principal on the door. Leadership is about how you act in your school and how you can develop through that process. So that's just another example that you can have a look at. And finally, this one is about the village showed up, and these are things where it was all the little things that mattered, like the school gave me a name badge with teacher on it. So that was a big deal to actually fit and have a name badge like everybody else in the school. I wasn't put in Prac Alley, which was where all the Prac students were in the staff room. I actually had my desk there. Thank you, Sue. I actually, they were as part of the school, and that was really important for them to do it. And even in stressful situations, in fact, in schools where it was quite stressful, people were helping and digging in and sharing and trying to relieve the pressure for each of those things. So if you're trying to build that collective, that collaborative, collegial sort of approach in your school, this might be an example it comes from. And it's not just an example we made up, and it's an example that we developed because we had the data to develop it. So I just keep saying that over and over. So I'm almost finished. The final slide here, if you've got any questions, and we will go to discussion, which I hope Jen's going to maybe facilitate. But my email address is there. We are in the process of having the branding put onto the facilitator guide and the scenario booklet. We have an online version of the report. We also have a published version of the report that's being printed as we speak. If you think these resources would be useful in your school, or you want to get hold of them for your own purposes, you could email me, and we will organise to get them through to you. So before I hand over to Jen, who might facilitate a question and discussion period, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate your time after school, and this project would not have been possible without the Horizon Grant, but definitely would not have been possible without the great participants that we had. And I don't think it would have been as successful without the great team that worked to pull it all together. So thank you very much. Over to you, Jen.
Hello. I couldn't seem to unmute myself, but I've managed to succeed in unmuting myself. Look, thank you, Loraine and Eunjae and team. That was a really fantastic presentation. And honestly, you made a huge amount of work look really simple and easy. You can tell by the way that I think that research was presented, the depth, the scale, the absolute rigour that went into that project, and we are very grateful to the government for the Horizon funding to do that kind of work. It's really important work. So bravo, Loraine, Eunjae and team. And it's great to see so many colleagues from other universities here. Hello, all my old mates from QUT. It's lovely to see you here. There's about 27 people in the room, but I think we could probably throw it open to some questions. So let's be relational and collegial and pop your cameras on. And rather than just putting things in the chat or in the Q&A, which we can lose if we do it that way, why don't we actually talk to each other? And we've got some time. And pop your hand up, and then I'll monitor as we go through, and I'll invite you in to ask a question or make a comment.
Eunjae, can we enable all the microphones so we don't have to fuss around with that all the time?
That is a
that
great
possible?
idea. Yeah, don't be shy, people. This is a great opportunity to both congratulate the team, but also ask more questions and make comments.
I have a question. If any of the Turn to Teaching interns, you may have been in the project, you may not have been in the project, I would be very interested to ask you, what were the key alignments when you felt you flourished? But I'll leave it, they may not want to answer, but I'm putting it out there to them. And if there are any mentor teachers and supervising teachers, similarly, what were the things that could be wrapped around? What were the really important things to you? And did the conversation resonate with you in particular places more than others? I'll turn off your mic if you put your hand up. I think we're struggling to turn off the whole thing. Oh, there we go. No hands? No one's saying?
Do we have any people who'd like to respond to that question, or feeling a bit shy today?
I'm flicking through. Oh, we must be very shy. I'll have to think of another question.
What about Fran or Donna or Malahide?
Loraine, I'm just wondering, I mean, you rightly pointed out that the Turn to Teaching program is a career change program, really. And what value do you think that brings to the teaching profession?
The employment-based pathway. I could tell you the Loraine McKay view, but I'll tell you the data view. Very much the mature approach to problem solving, the experience of their other life skill. For example, in engineering, there was a guy who was a builder, and the hospitality area. Those people brought in such practical information, real world experiences, and a scientist, having people, the students eating out of the palm of their hands because they were, I wasn't there, I'm just reporting it, but they were really excited because they were able to talk about, when I was on a job, and they had photos of things they did, and that real world experience help them to make connections with the students and help the students connect to the content knowledge. That was the first thing. The second thing was about just generally the maturity, being able to problem solve, often understanding the value of relationships, how to interact with parents. Those sort of day-to-day aspects were really greatly appreciated by leadership.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Donna, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jen.
Here we go. I've got my mic on. I've got my camera on. Look, I was thinking about implications for groups like AITSL, sort of thinking about AITSL and so forth. What are the big, given that we know there are going to be changes to professional standards looming, what have we learned from this that could apply broadly across the profession? I'm really interested to hear your views on that.
For me, one of the areas of the the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers is the implied nature of reflection. And that's an area that I think really has to be a lot more explicit, because being a reflective practitioner, and again, this is where the liaison made a huge difference, being able to meet in a community of practice with their student over 2 weeks, every fortnight, and expecting them to send a reflection earlier to talk about to establish what the conversation would be about. That's a really important part of our program at Griffith, and I can't speak to the others, but it was a really important part of the Turn to Teaching model, that liaison was there to encourage that reflection, to encourage them to be able to reframe a challenge into an opportunity, I guess, without diminishing anything, but, you know, learning about yourself at the same time as you're learning to be a teacher as well. And I think that's a really important part. And in fact, yesterday I was talking to a deputy principal who wasn't anything to do with the Turn to Teaching or employment-based pathways, but in terms of new teachers coming out, was really complimentary about Griffith's graduates being reflective practitioners. And I think that's really, really crucial and needs to be foregrounded in the standards. It might also be starting to rethink maybe what professional experience looks like, what it could be like, but that's a bigger beast than our project, but it certainly opens the door for conversation about variations in prac. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we should cancel it out, because we've actually, the professional experience period was a bit challenging for the schools to get their head around. Why are they suddenly pre-service teachers again when they've been teaching independently for a term? But actually when they went to, and they're having full-on supervision and they're getting opportunities for observation, and they're made to stop and think and reflect, that's when their practice can grow again. If you just leave people, then unless some other conditions come around, they don't flourish. Prac created the opportunity for those conditions to be foregrounded, everyone take a breath, align, and allowed for flourishment, or identifying where people needed to have some triage.
Thanks, Loraine. I think there's some really interesting things that you said in that response for me. And you saw me smile at a particular point, which is the area that I'm really interested in is, you know, how long, how much, when, all of those things associated with professional experience. Yeah. I think the TTT is a particularly unique beast that we can learn from. So thank you for sharing.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for your question.
If I could make, yes, if I could just make a little observation, Loraine. I was really interested and pleased to hear in the data the point you made about the depth of disciplinary knowledge that these teachers bring to now the teaching profession. And I think that's really powerful. We know that teachers who know their content, you know, often make great teachers. And that's not just in the senior secondary school. I'm talking across, you know, from early childhood all the way through. We need teachers who know what they're teaching and know it well and know it deeply, and also are passionate about it. So bringing that, you know, knowledge from previous lives, if you like, into the teaching profession is just is such an important aspect, I think, of this program. And so I was pleased to see that came through.
And no one's suggesting that it was an easy transition.
Yes.
That it's the good mentorship, the good supervision, the reflective practitioner who is able to transfer that knowledge from one context into another and turn their knowledge to be able to identify how that knowledge could be created. So, but then they need the skills to be able to scaffold it. So again, it shows the complexity of becoming a teacher, and they come in with a strength, a different starting point to some other people, and And that's why it's so important to individualise that support for them as well, and for them to be part of that goal setting. And that's what a really good liaison does in that process, whether it's for prac or whether it's for in the internship in particular, helping them to set goals and small goals. Because if you have a small goal, when you come back in 2 weeks' time and you've actually got half an hour to talk with your peers and a person, you start thinking, oh, my week wasn't as bad as I thought. I did achieve something. And we all know how valuable that is, to feel like you've done something well.
Thanks, Loraine. Any final comments or questions? No? All right. Well, we might bring the webinar to a close and give Loraine and Eunjae and team a big round of applause for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you. And please get in touch if you would like copies or electronic versions of those resources for use as well. So appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Loraine. Good night, everybody.
Good night, bye.